Today in our culture, it is really common for people to move in before they get married just to make sure it's all going to work out. In my day, Ben, our parents call that shacking up. They don't really call it that anymore. But it was
because there's no shacks that people are living in. But yeah, I get what you're saying.
So my name is Dan. I'm with Ben. We're the teaching pastors at Life Fellowship in suburban Charlotte, North Carolina. This is Life Talks, and we are in a series called Socially Acceptable Sins. So today we're kind of concluding the series.
One.
We've had a whole, and we didn't. It's certainly not exhaustive.
We just wanted everyone to feel guilty.
Today,
it worked. It worked.
Yeah, but today most sins have become socially acceptable.
Yeah,
if we're going to be really
true,
honest about it. But we're going to talk about divorce, and we're going to talk about living with each other before they get married.
Yeah.
You know, and sometimes, I mean, people love technicalities. When we talk about shacking up or living together before marriage, we're just basically talking sex before marriage.
I mean, that's...
I mean, you don't have to be living under the same roof, but we're talking about indulging what it historically and biblically has been a rite of marriage, which is, you know, sexual engagement with your spouse.
Yeah.
And today, the notion of waiting until you're married, waiting until you're in a covenant relationship is anywhere from quaint to disgusting.
I mean, it feels almost like the younger generation looks at sex before marriage like the way we would look at a horse and buggy. Like and we're
going to use a transportation analogy. They would also use this as I would never buy a car without taking it for a test drive.
Yeah, I mean, so I think there is this reality.
Very, very nice to refer to your future wife as a Mazda.
So the reason I bring this up is it's interesting. We hear a lot of evangelicals and even social conservatives talk about the war against marriage, and they talk about gay marriage. And I'm not trying to minimize that, but heterosexuals have done more to damage marriage than homosexuals have. Let's just be honest with that. Because if we as followers of Jesus actually kept the sanctity and the uniqueness of marriage, the biblical marriage, the way that God wants us to, we would have a much higher platform to talk about and show what godly marriages look like, the way that God was designed marriages. So I just thought it's interesting to me. I felt this more than before I studied it, but for you and I just feel like more young couples feel very it's a very normal thing for them to cohabitate, even within church. And I remember, 20, 30 years ago, we're going to sound like old fuddy-duddies right now, but I think I would like to call us biblicists. But the reality is 20, 30 years ago, when you would hear of someone who was, a born-again Christian or someone who's a church attender living together, it was almost like,
excuse me.
I remember my dad having to confront a couple in his church about cohabitation, and they threatened them with church discipline. Mm-hmm. And this was in the 80s, right? I mean, this was a big deal. And all of a sudden, it's kind of like we just shrug our shoulders at it and say, well, it's just the lay of the land now. And so things have deteriorated. And I think it's a reality of most people they serve the God of sex more than they serve the God of the Bible or the God of the universe. And so I think there's just these trends, these norms now that is just sweeping over the younger generation. And I've got some stats. Don't you love stats?
I love stats.
And so 58% of white evangelicals believe that cohabitation is acceptable if a couple plans to marry.
Which is interesting because 59% of adults 18 to 44 have lived with an unmarried partner at some point in their lives.
Yeah, I mean, so evangelicals are people that we would say align with us doctrinally, theologically. But what we find is there's a huge gap between what people say they are and how people live.
Yeah, which is a moral theistic
deism.
Morally theistic.
Yeah. I knew we'd get it out somehow.
Moral therapeutic deism. That's what it is.
Oh,
yes. So it's interesting because you have all of these, you have the nuns. The nuns are the completely secular, non-religious. 71% of them are completely for cohabitation, see no problem with it. Only 9% of them would say, I'm completely against it. And I would say the group, so they have Catholics and then mainline Protestants and then Black Protestants and then evangelicals. So these are kind of the five major groups. And evangelicals do have the most people that would align with the biblical viewpoint, but it's still completely out of whack. For example, again, half of them, have no problem, shacking up, and only a quarter of them, 27%, would say, I'm definitely not going to cohabitate for any reason whatsoever. And that to me is like 1/4 of self-professing evangelicals are saying, no, I'm going to wait until I'm married before I live with someone.
Right.
And so I think that's a huge sign that something's off, that we haven't discipled our children. We haven't really taught them. But I just think that the world has seeped in and has taken control of their behaviors.
Well, so that we have kind of like this, because I don't think we can assume, even in our audience, that people understand what a biblical definition of marriage is. What is God's best for the relationship of a man and a woman who are forming a family?
Well, I think it's one man, one woman under the covenant of marriage before God for a lifetime.
So when you say covenant of marriage, what does that mean?
I think it's a binding agreement between two people before God saying, I'm pledging my entire life to you. Or it's an agreement that is bound by more than just, it's a contract. It's a binding contract that God seals and says, this before me, this is what is now forever, good. And so covenant has always been something that God created. It's an agreement between two parties of saying that we're agreeing to a contract of, you're going to do this, I'm going to do this, and this, it's not going to be broken. God, in the very beginning in the book of Genesis, talks about how man shall leave his mother and father and cleave to his wife. That is the idea of leaving your one family and cleaving, this idea of oneness, and the two shall become one flesh. God's desire and design for marriage is always oneness. Oneness spiritually, oneness emotionally, oneness sexually. So oneness is this picture. And because Paul talks about marriage being a metaphor or a symbol of the gospel. He talks about this in Ephesians chapter 5, this idea that the covenant of marriage is very similar to the covenant of that God makes with mankind, two becoming one. And so when we treat marriage as if this is just an option for us and I'm going to opt in and opt out of this, however I feel like it or how you're making me feel, we are completely demeaning the institute of marriage. And that's why there's so much brokenness today. And so I think it's the elevation of indulgence in sex that I want to feel good and I want to have sex with who I want to have sex with, having no moral standards in that. I think it's this idea that we don't really understand what marriage is. Marriage is just one of the most pet peeves of mine is, Dan, I hate it when we talk about partners today. This is my partner. Yeah. This is my partner. This is my partner. This is my partner. And it's like we have now neutered this word of husband and spouse, wife. Yeah, it's and partner can mean anything. I hate it when they talk about partners and whether they're married or non-married.
It reduces it to a business relationship or something,
or just some relationship of convenience. I don't like. I think vocabulary and words mean something, and partner is. I think it can be used in right context. I just don't like it as a substitute for everything because husband and wife connotates so much. It connotates that there is a covenant of marriage. It connotates there's one man and one woman. I think those are really important terms I don't think we should lose.
And it should also communicate exclusivity.
Yes.
Yeah. That they're not on the market. Yeah. Unfortunately, a natural progression of a lack of moral standards before marriage results in a lack of moral standards after marriage. So now we have the introduction of pornography into the bedroom on a regular basis, sometimes being justified by the fact, well, we're married, and this is just to spice up our relationship. Yeah. But now, and this the research that's just now coming out on this, and a lot of it is connected to what they're seeing in pornography, indulging. The next progression when you invite someone into the marriage relationship, the sexual
multiple partners
is now coming, and so things like an open marriage, these types of things, or bringing in a third person into the bedroom, or so forth. Those are becoming frighteningly common in this generation, particularly because I work so much with Gen Zs and younger millennials, and again. deviancy, and this would be considered deviancy because it deviates from God's plan, as becoming normalized.
Yeah.
And pornography is the first step in normalizing it, but then you act on the normalization in a real way.
Yeah.
So all of these factors are important. Which is why God set the standard. What do you say, Ben, to the young couple who are in their mid-20s and they're saying, this is a big deal. We're going to buy a house together. We're going to have kids together. And I wouldn't buy a car unless I take a test drive. I wouldn't buy a house that I didn't tour and had inspected. Yeah. So you expect me to say I do and then spend my life in monogamy with this one person the rest of my life, and I've never before engaged in that with them.
Yeah.
So what would your response to them be?
I think that they have a completely misguided understanding of marriage, that marriage is not about your own personal fulfillment. The phrase that Tom Cruise says at the end of Jerry Maguire, "You complete me." And we're all like, oh, it's so sweet. I just love it. I want, that is the most unbiblical thing. The whole idea is, you make me happy. That's what he's saying. And to me, that's not what love is about. Sacrifice. Love is about, I'm going to help make sure your needs are met. It's about oneness. It's not about you are going to be my greatest accessory in life. I think most men and most women look at what marriage is about is the greatest accessory to my happiness. You need to be the greatest source of my own personal fulfillment, because personal fulfillment is the waters we all swim in. It's why we work where we want to work. We do what we want to do. If it's not personally fulfilling to me, I'm not doing it. I'm not having kids because they might mess up my life. I'm not, all of these things. And so we have a completely secular worldview that says, life is about me. And so when life is about me and someone you get married, I mean, Dan, you know this, marriage, your spouse and your children will cause you the greatest pain in life.
Yeah.
They just will.
They will, without a question.
Why? Because you love them the most and you're the most vulnerable to them. And so you have the greatest opportunity for disappointment and pain to the very people that you are claiming to love the most. And so what ends up happening is, and this kind of bleeds into the divorce thing, but the cohabitation is all about me. I want to make sure I'm comfortable with you, that you're going to be satisfying my needs. And it's this giant, job interview for years. And there's no commitment. And one of the problems with cohabitation and sex before marriage is you might be dating a person that you probably, the moment you introduce sex into a relationship, your entire perspective of judgment is now clouded and messed up. Because now you're not able to look at someone with clarity and make judgments on their character, will they make a good mother or father? Can
I trust them?
Can I trust? There's things that you can look at objectively as you're making decisions of, is this the person I want to spend the rest of my life with? But when you enter sex into the relationship, it now is this film by which you are now forcing, I just want it to work out because I've given my heart, my body, my soul to this person. And you've done something that's only reserved for marriage, and it clouds your judgment. And I believe that's why studies have shown people that cohabitate have a worse record of divorce. Now, there were studies that came out a few years ago like, no, that's not true. Look at these numbers. But what they're showing you is the numbers of the percentage of divorce of cohabitation. It doesn't really affect couples until like years 3, 4, beyond the first 2 years.
Yeah.
The first 2 years, obviously people who have never cohabitated, those numbers are higher than those who haven't. But that's because they've already been living together.
Right.
There's not an adjustment period.
Yeah.
And so it makes sense that the 2 years of the first 2 years of marriage, there might be a higher percentage of people who didn't live together. But in the long-term perspective, cohabitation has a much higher divorce record than those who don't cohabitate.
Yeah, the research absolutely shows that. Yeah. Before we go to divorce, I want to just add this to it, in that not only do I think, the question I posed or whatever says that you have a wrong view of marriage and a wrong, so I think it has a wrong view of sex.
Yes.
Because, You don't get married just so you can have sex.
Right.
And the reality is sex in your 20s is different than sex in your 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s. And the reality is something could go wrong in that marriage that makes sex impossible. Somebody could become seriously ill, could have an injury. There are going to be periods in your life where you're so exhausted where, the first year you're married, you may be a couple of bunnies, and then later on you're going to be like elephants.
After 3 kids, you're like, and 2 of them are in diapers.
Months So, I mean, the reality is, and no 2 marriages are the same. No 2 relationships are the same. And if it's always about the sex and not the love, if it's always about the sex and not the promises, the covenants, and if it's always about the sex, you won't work as hard.
Yeah.
Because once the sex isn't where you want it to be, then I'm going to tag out.
Yeah.
And so we have to make sure that we understand what a marriage is for and what it's about, in addition, which we could go on and on. But let's go, in time that remains, we doubled this up with divorce because, quite frankly, divorce is at epidemic proportions. And as you said, living together before is even more of a problem.
Yeah, again, because they're going into marriage with the wrong perspective and with the wrong expectation. And so I think it's really important to understand that, you do things before marriage that set you up for, long-term, that covenant understanding. Now, let me just say this. When we talk about divorce, I understand that there's a lot of pain when we talk about this. Yeah. And I believe that there are exceptions to divorce. I think I should say this. I believe that God allows divorce. We know from Scripture that divorce is allowed for sexual immorality. Jesus talks about that.
Repeated unrepentant.
Yep. We talked, and we could spend a lot of time talking about what that is. Paul also allows for divorce when you have a non-believing spouse who abandons a believing spouse. Basically, someone, you have a married couple, and someone within the couple becomes a follower of Jesus. And that follower of Jesus now, the person who's not a follower says, I don't like this.
Right, this is different.
I'm done. I don't like what you're becoming, and I'm out of here.
Right.
Okay. The whole point of Paul saying, if someone leaves you because of your faith, he says you are free. Now, again, we can talk about what that free is. I think the third reason for divorce, I would say, is abuse. Especially physical abuse. Now, some people want to talk about emotional abuse, but that is a whole can of worms. We could probably have an entire conversation about emotional abuse. My fear is that many people use the emotional abuse as he hurt my feelings. Yeah. And I'm not saying that there's not legitimate emotional torment that people can go through, but I think it's...
But in defense of where we come from, either the Bible says it, or strongly implies it, or it doesn't.
Right.
And so we can't, just because we think it's horrible that you're verbally abused, does not mean that we can say, oh, the Bible says that's okay, when the Bible does not.
Right, correct.
And so that's our responsibility. We can't make up new things that we hope the Bible or wish the Bible said.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think, so we just... Let's remember that. That's what Jesus says, or the Bible allows divorce for those reasons. I mean, actually, the Bible doesn't say anything about abuse, but there's a biblical...
But there are other parts where he does deal with it.
There's biblical ethics involved in fact that, to save someone's life, because most people that are physically abused, there's a very high percentage that those people will be killed by their spouse.
Yeah, it starts with a broken arm or a thrown wine bottle that hits somebody in the head.
And so it's the equivalent of Rahab lying to protect the 2 spies. That was an act of faith, right? And so to save someone's life, I think divorce is okay in order to save, which is a higher value, right? Yes. So biblically speaking, I think there's an ethical argument from Scripture that divorce is okay with abuse. We can talk all about that. If you want to email me, email Dan.
I'll be happy.
But I think that the problem is, Dan, a lot of people are getting divorced for reasons because I don't feel loved anymore.
Yeah. Or I'm not happy.
I'm not happy. Or my wife is just so mean to me, or my husband's a loser, or whatever it is. Mm-hmm. And so they make up these narratives. I shouldn't say make up. They start telling themselves these things like, I should have never married this person in the first place. That is the most common things when I'm talking to couples, especially when one spouse wants to get out, is that they have felt like they start believing this lie, like this was a mistake. I should have never married this person.
Yeah, I should quit making my house payments because I should never have bought that house in the first. Yeah, that doesn't work. Right?
It doesn't work. The other thing I would say is usually when there's two people in a marriage, when someone is like, I'm done with this marriage, I'm out. 90% of the time, someone has made up their mind and says, I'm out. There's somebody else.
Oh, yes.
Whether it is an emotional affair or a sexual affair.
Or hidden.
But I've been in those conversations where someone's just so extreme at this marriage is hopeless. I have no problem. This person's a loser. I'll never they have given up.
Yeah.
Okay. When someone is so adamant that this marriage is done for, and if you don't support me, you don't love me, and all these kinds of things, I always want time to say, who's the other person?
I generally do. I generally say, who is it? Yeah.
And because you are not looking to save your marriage, you're looking to get out. And typically people that want to get out, they want to get out because there's someone else.
And that's when they do create the narrative.
Yes.
They absolutely do.
Yes.
Because they have to rationalize and justify their own sin.
Yeah. And so I've never met anyone who did that, who cheated on their spouse, ended up leaving their spouse and married this other spouse that turned out great.
Right.
I've never, ever in my entire life, I can tell you probably about 2,000 stories of how it made it worse, how their lives are worse, how everything in their life is worse. But I cannot tell you one story of someone who did that and their life is better. Mm-hmm. I'm just being honest with you. Mm-hmm. So just know that there's a consequence. And I heard this from a secular psychologist who studied divorce. Wrote books on it. I think he was a professor at Penn State University, and he had this huge sociological study on divorce. And his whole thing was divorce destroys children. And he said something. This is not a believer. This is not a Christian at all. One of the things he said is, when you all the pain you're feeling in your marriage, all the pain you feel that this person, lost love, the moment you get a divorce, what you're doing is you're taking your pain and you're divvying up to your children, saying, I want you to carry this now. That's what you do as a parent. You are now taking the pain you feel of, I don't feel loved, I don't feel fulfilled, I don't feel this, and I just hate this marriage. And when you leave your spouse, what you're doing with your pain is you're transferring it to your children for them to carry for the rest of their lives.
Yep.
And again, this is a a psychologist who did the research on children of divorce, and basically that was his takeaway. So know that there are consequences to this decision.
Yeah. Then the consequences are real, they're powerful, they're painful. I would just add this. Because people are famous for doing this, and they'll say, well, you may not know somebody, but I know of somebody or I know kids who did just fine or whatever. And here's the reality. The standard, right or wrong, the standard is not based on our experiences anyway.
That's true.
The ultimate standard is when you make a covenant before God, you're not to break it.
Yeah.
Sometimes God in his favor and his grace allows that which Satan has intended for evil to be used for good. Yeah. And it's a certainly undeserved grace, because that's what the very nature of grace is. But
and let me just say this also. I don't believe if you got divorced for the wrong reasons that God's done with you, he's put you on a shelf, that there's not a chance for redemption or renewal or a restoration. I'm not saying any of that at all. God can love the person who divorced and remarried, and we're not even going to talk about remarriage, but I don't believe that you should wear the scarlet D for the rest of your life. Right. I don't believe that at all. What I do believe is there's many people that are thinking about divorce now that shouldn't be thinking about divorce. They should be thinking about reconciliation, because the sanctity of marriage and the commitment of marriage is important to God.
And marriage is worth fighting for.
That's right.
Wholeness, completeness, obedience, submission, surrender. All these things are worth fighting for. We packed
so much into 25 minutes.
We did, and we didn't even fool around at the beginning of it with a bunch of nonsense.
That might be connected.
I still have my matcha, Dan, if you want to try it.
Yeah, I noticed that you're not drinking much of it.
No, because this conversation is so amazing, Dan.
No, it's because it's so disgusting.
We also made him do most of the talking, to be fair. When would he?
If you're watching, watch this.
Well, on that positive note, thank you as always for listening. listening to us here at Life Talks. It is our privilege to be able to come to you in this format. If you ever have any questions you'd like for us to entertain, please send your suggestions to lifetalks@lifecharlotte.com. We hope you'll follow us and like us and subscribe to us and all the other good things. Share the word. And until next time, thanks as always for joining us here at Life Talks.
You've been listening to Life Talks. Be sure to hit the subscribe button so you never miss a new episode. Share this podcast on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter to let your friends and family know about Life Talks. We'd love to hear from you as well, so leave a comment and let us know your thoughts on this episode or any other topics we've discussed. Life Talks is a ministry of Life Fellowship in Cornelius, North Carolina. For more information on Life Talks or Life Fellowship, visit lifecharlotte.com or you can find us on Facebook at Life Fellowship Charlotte.